Just over a century ago, this scene could be found on any of 234 eastern Canadian rivers. Today, the spring log drive on Quebec's Coulonge River is the last of its kind. Every spring, thousands of tons of timber are driven to a sawmill situated at the junction of the Coulonge and Ottawa rivers. This is the story of the men who still drive the Coulonge. The Coulonge is the only North American river where large quantities of pine saw logs are still driven as they were 100 years ago. The spring log drive is the climax of a logging season that began many months before. This early documentary of the winter operations was made in Quebec in the 1920s. Jeff Randolph had just got his first job in the woods.
When you're young, you tackle anything. But you see, down in the Maritimes where I came from, that's mostly what there was bushwork. It was all rural. And the farmer, you take a farmer that had 3 or 4 sons, well, the little farm couldn't support them, so they all went to the woods. And, well, it got to be a profession, going to the woods in the fall, and that's what you had to do, or else working the only shoe factory they had there. Well, who did ever wanted to work in a shoe factory?
For the women left behind, it seemed that half the able-bodied men in Canada were leaving for a winter in the woods.
Foolish you wanna go away, seeking fortune's favor on your own, while the one who stays beside you, foolish me, is left alone.
There's no toilets, just went outdoors. It was damn cold, too. Take off a pair of Mackinaw pants and get down to the bare bum there, and about 35 below zero. She was pretty frosty. Stanfield's underwear was the great thing. And they were warm, holy, and itchy. We used to call them rock maples. And they'd stand alone pretty near after you wore them a long time.
Leaving me, its way is hardly fair. Must I go seek a fortune too? Or must I wait till folly finds its own way home to me and foolish you?
The boys used to call the bush the poor man's overcoat. But nobody wore an overcoat anyway, because you couldn't work with an overcoat, heck. See, wind is what freezes you, isn't it? It can be 30 below or 20 below, and you can stand that if it's calm, but if there's a wind with it, you'll perish, wouldn't you?
An eastern logging camp was a horse camp. The elite of the camp were the teamsters. They hauled the logs to the lakes and rivers in preparation for the drive. Their greatest fear was of losing control of a full load of logs on a steep hill.
Everybody was always frightened because sometimes you could get off the road and be killed. You see, a load of logs could weigh from 20 to 30 tons. Well, there's no 2 horses in the world who can hold back that. The word for a teamster was a hide pounder or a hair pounder. There's one who's quite a strong Catholic. We used to call him Gentleman Charlie Sproul because he always wore a trench coat and he looked more like a bank manager than a teamster. He'd always cross himself. And he'd sing a little song of his favorite hymn, Jesus, Savior, Pilot, me. Get up, Duke. God damn, away he'd go. The men changed, their attitude changed, everything changed when the horse camps went out. Men lost pride in their work, and there's no sentiment in a machine. You see, a horse is a living animal. Something alive, but a machine, they didn't care if they broke a bolt on a machine, but you cared if you had a sore shoulder on a horse, because he was alive. It wasn't right.
After World War II, mechanization turned the logging operation into a giant outdoor assembly line, and the lumberjack became the forest factory worker. With the introduction of the internal combustion engine, life in the bush was changed forever. tree cutters are joined by the men who will ultimately take the logs downriver, the whitewater men of the Coulonge. Their first job is to thicken the ice. They will have to bear the weight of the trucks that will dump logs on the lake for the next 2 months. The 2 men cutting teams are paid on a piecework basis. Each company that uses the river drive has its own identifying mark, which is branded onto the pine logs. Next, they are trucked to the log dump on Lake Pompon at the head of the Coulonge by the teamsters of today. Spruce and white pine are cut to a standard length of 16 feet plus 8 inches. The extra 8 inches will absorb the battering they receive en route to the sawmill. By February, the felling operation is over. The log dump on and beside Lake Pompon is stacked and ready to go. Early April, the ice begins to thaw. Getting the logs moving is harder this spring. It's discovered that some of the ice was thickened in a bay where there's no current to help it break up. This creates a delay. It takes several weeks to loosen the logs, and time is critical.
We're all lousy as pet coons. For 3 or 4 months we sleeping together, never changing clothes. You're bound to get lice. Seam squirrels, we called them. They never bothered anybody. I think it was just a way of life. But if it got too bad, the fellow would take his clothes out and boil them in the pot and wash himself with tobacco juice. That would kill anything.
Is a race against advancing summer. The object, to take advantage of the floodwater from the spring thaw to get the maximum number of logs downriver. The first logs leave Lake Pompon on April 18. It takes a log 4 days to float the 117 miles to the sawmill. The first logs down grease the river, forming harmless side jams in the backwaters. This enables the logs that follow to use the natural channel which is formed. Now is when the risk of a jam forming is greatest. Despite aerial surveillance, a serious jam occurs. Within minutes, it grows, stretching back for several hundred yards. It would take a week to clear by hand.
There's no better men walking cork boots than the French Canadian, the real authentic ones. It's their natural temperament to be quick. The Scotch and Irish are great men. They're strong and they're able men, but they're slower moving.
Now begins the sweep, clearing the river of thousands of stranded logs. Certain sections of the river are not navigable, and the boats must be portaged. Where at all possible, the boatmen shoot the rapids. Today, this crew is the first to negotiate a series of rapids called the Wolf. The men come from Fort Coulonge, a Quebec town which has produced several generations of rivermen. The language of work is a blend of English and French. Throughout the drive, priority is given to moving the pine. If left out of the water, these valuable logs will become stained and infested with beetles. You have to make the most of the short drive season, so the hours are long. Life revolves around the meals which punctuate the 12-hour workdays. Up at 5 for breakfast, first lunch at 10, second lunch at 3, supper at 7, and into bed by 8. Time is expressed in relation to meals. To a driver, the time now is not 9 o'clock, but an hour before first lunch. Lunches are prepared by Joe Henri. Joe knows from experience how far the men will have swept down river, and he sets up shop accordingly. The smoke screen is to deter the emerging hordes of black flies. In his youth, Joe used to travel up the Coulonge in August. After cutting logs all winter, he would only come down again with the spring drive. At 65, he's now reluctantly facing retirement.
There's some awful concoctions mixed up there when a man was sick. The cook did that. There was Jamaica ginger. Of course, you could get an awful glow out of that. And there was Perry Davis painkiller. There was Buckley's mixture, good for man or beast. There was beef, iron, and wine. Of course, all their stomachs were boilerplate anyway. It didn't matter what they ate or drank, they never hurt their stomachs.
Keeping clothes dry is a constant struggle, and the men are prone to bouts of flu. By the end of May, the discomfort of ice-cold water is exchanged for that of being bitten by mosquitoes and black flies. Despite the rigors of the job, the same men come back year after year. One of the most agile drivers is Joe's son, Ronald Henri.
Well, you gotta make sure you come back in time, not too fast and not too slow. You try to hurry too much, sometimes you dive in. I was 15 when I started the first year, and it's my 9th spring up here, and I hope it's the last one. I say that, but I guess next year I'll be here. That's just like the army. Once you start that, you gotta come back up every year.
Eating and sleeping are not the only preoccupations of the drive.
Up here they talk about women, and all they have in their head is skin book. But once they go down below, they don't look at their women. All they do is talk about the log drive. Easter egg.
logs of a suddenly breaking jam can grind a man to a pulp. The bravado that has cost many a driver his life is now discouraged. No one has drowned on the Coulonge since 1952.
If a man drowned, we'd always send for the priest, and he'd come and he'd bless the spot. We'd get a good whittler, and he'd carve a nice cross out of cedar so it wouldn't rot, with the man's name on it and the date. And they generally made a coffin out of 2 barrels. And they put the barrels end to end and just poke him in that and take him out to the nearest cemetery if he didn't have any relations, which most of them didn't.
It now begins to rain at least once a day. By June 7, the drivers have swept 35 miles downstream and made camp at the mouth of the Crow River.
Oh, send her down, JC. Send her down. We double the power. Double the power. We got the 10. Someone's knocking at the door.
Up here, basically, the men like very simplified home country beef, chicken, and pork type dishes. Nothing terribly fancy, but substantial, and lots of desserts.
A logging operation has always been judged by the quality of the meals it serves. A big improvement of the modern drive is the variety of food. In the days before, they had a freezer. The never-changing menu is beans, salted pork bellies, molasses, black tea, bread, and pies. Meals are always of heroic proportion. There are 15 campsites on the river. After 3 days at Crow Camp, they prepare to move on again. After breakfast, most of the men leave to continue working downriver. A small gang remains to help the cook, cookie, and chore boy break camp. As an incentive to keep moving, the river boss always tries to keep the cookery just ahead of the sweep gang. Today's move is to Gautier Chute Camp, 7 miles downriver. Everything fits into 2 small boats. The design of the boats, called pointers, has not changed in over a century. They're flat-bottomed, robust, and stable. Their draft so shallow that it's said that even fully loaded, they can float on heavy dew. The day begins with the cook. He wakes the camp at 5. Even in June, the mornings can be very cold. With frequent downpours, the river level has not dropped as quickly as expected, although the rivermen are not completely at the mercy of nature. 10 dams have been constructed on tributaries of the river, which give control over about 30% of the Coulonge watershed. By judicious opening, closing of these dams, the water on the river can be raised by up to 18 inches for short periods of time. A sudden flush can sometimes dislodge a stubborn jam. Despite the addition of outboard motors and chainsaws to move tons of tangled timber, it still requires prodding with pike poles and peavies. Then a machine called the skidder was introduced. Once it took 100 men to ride herd on the same amount of timber as today. The addition of 2 skidders has cut the number of men required in half to 50. Because of the dangers of working on water, alcohol has traditionally been banned in the river. Using a cable to winch the logs apart has also reduced the hazards of jam breaking, although in the process the cable itself breaks with great regularity. Sometimes the jam breaks with the first pull, but more often, as in this jam, it takes several hours and sometimes days to clear. Where the jam is situated directly above a chute of water, a safety rope attached to the shore is used. Boatmen have drowned when their pointer accidentally went over the top. Rapidly increasing fuel costs continue to make the drive the most economical method of transporting the logs to the mill. But the future of the drive itself depends on there being a continued supply of suitable trees. And the large white pines on the Coulonge Drive come from one of the last economically accessible stands in Canada. When all else fails to shift a jam, they bring on the dynamite.
If you ask any girl from the parish around what pleases her most from her head to her toes, she'll say, I'm not sure that it's business of yours, but I sure like to waltz with the log driver, for he goes burning down and down white water. That's where the log driver learns to step lightly. It's burning down and down white water. A log driver's waltz pleases girls completely. When the drive's nearly over, I like to slow down and watch all the lads as they work on the river. Back on evening they'll be in the
On July 10, the last logs are on their way to the sawmill.
for he goes burning down and down.
Of course, we had the go preachers and the do-gooders, and They always were trying to reform us, but there was no reform in us. From the demon rum and loose ladies, as old Arnie Adams said, says, what I want when I get to town, when I've been up in the woods there 6 months, and comes in step-ins and bottles.
On the merchants and lawyers, they're